Thank you for joining us for this live webinar session. I am Ayman Chaudhary, the Head of Secretariat at the Global Compact Network Canada, which is the Canadian chapter of the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative, the United Nations Global Compact. As we are all experiencing, COVID-19 is causing grave and unforeseen impacts on people's lives, their families, and society as a whole. It has caused many businesses to temporarily shut down and many to identify alternative options to keep things running. However, as we are going through this crisis, we understand that it is now more important than ever to have a stronger focus on the sustainability issues while we are planning for the recovery phase. We must ensure that the measures being taken by the private sector and the government pave the way to a more sustainable economy and do not lock us further into a high carbon future. Our communities and institutions must succeed in planning for and adapting to climate change, or we will all be at significant risk of more heartbreaks and tragedy due to climate change. As a network of leading Canadian businesses committed to the sustainability principles, we recognize that the need to have a very collaborative discussion to focus on the Canadian response to COVID-19 and share the insights, priorities, and inspiration of top business leaders, government representatives, and sustainability experts. We had the first part of the webinar series on May 14th, where we had Stephanie Vakari, the managing partner of Baker & McKinsey Canada, Marcelo Liu, the president of BSF Canada, and Neelam Sandhu, the vice president of business operations at BlackBerry, as our speakers to share the leadership insights. The webinar recording is uploaded on our website, and you can register for the webinar viewing and listen into the speakers if you had not had the chance to listen to them earlier. Today is the second part of the webinar series, where we are delighted to have three more inspiring leaders from the leading companies in Canada. Today we have with us Brandon Seal, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Scotiabank, representing the financial sector, Jeff Pegg, Director of Sustainability at TELUS, representing the fixed line telecommunication sector, and Magali Dapras, the Chief Strategy Officer from TC Transcontinental, representing the packaging sector. Thank you so much to all three of you for joining us today. I know there must be a lot on your plate already to guide your company through this crisis, but as a regular follower of your updates, I know a lot of good initiatives are being taken by your team that could be very inspiring for our listeners today. I would again like to thank the attendees for joining this live webinar session. If you have any question for our speakers today, please write those in the chat box, and depending on the time available at the end of the session, we will try to address as many as we can. So without further ado, let's start our discussion today. Let's start the discussion first with Jeff Pegg, who has been one of our strongest supporters of our sustainability efforts in Canada and our go-to person to discuss the sustainability topics. Jeff, as a representative of the FLT industry, the fixed line telecommunication industry, how would you say the COVID-19 has impacted the industry? Also, how is your business supporting the employees for their well-being and the communities during this time of crisis?
Great. Well, thanks, Ayman, for the introduction and the invite. Pleased to share the panel with Brendan and Magali today. So, and hello to all the attendees. You know, one thing that we've focused in on in this pandemic is really focusing in on our team primarily, and our communities, which includes our customers and their safety and well-being. You know, I think that's, you know, regardless of industry, it's where we can focus to do the most good. And in our industry, of course, you know, just by being on this webinar alone, we know that the networks and our network is an essential service, and it's been one of those things that's been identified and recognized, including by our government leaders. And I think that's important to remember. So of course, what we have done is really focus in on our networks. Just for context, of course, we've had in Canada 170% increase in remote work. With the quality and focusing on our network, what we've seen according to a recent study is that productivity has increased by 25% in Canada as compared to the United States and Europe, where productivity is actually down 7 and 8%, and that's part of that due to the quality of networks since self-isolation practices have been in place. And then for other contexts, Mother's Day, which we've just had a few weeks ago, is usually the number one day for phone calls on our network. And what's happening every day now is we've seen a 4 times a Mother's Day type rate on voice traffic across our network, which is a 50% increase overall. So our networks have been robust. We have the best network in the world, and that's something that we continue to focus in on as a team to make sure that our communities, our customers, and Canadians can stay connected, which is now again recognized as an essential service overall. It's so important that Canadians remain connected to the resources that matter the most to them. The social resources that are required, the economic resources, and access to, say, government programs through digital means. And then, of course, we can't forget education as well. And so our focus has been there to protect our team and our customers. Also, what we've seen, we have been working remotely as a team at TELUS for many years. In fact, prior to the pandemic, we had about 70% of our team members working on a remote basis on any given day. And that's now increased to 95% currently for domestically, and for our TELUS International operations, that's moved to 85%. So I think that's been a success for us. The flexibility and agility to enable that through the technology and tools that are common with our industry is very important. More broadly, of course, we have responded to some of the hardships that Canadians are facing by, doing things like waiving overage charges for our high-speed internet and wireless roaming fees, for example, and doing things like flexible pay arrangements and canceling, delaying cancellations and suspensions, etc., to help customers across the country as well. Of course, we've closed many of our stores. They're just maybe starting to reopen. And some of the stores that did remain open, of course, we had the relevant social distancing and sanitary protocols so that there's a touchless service. And then one of the great innovations that we've seen is, of course, when we're out with our customers in the field, when we're connecting internet, TV, smart home security, is that we've come up with a plan where we're doing these virtual installs, where our technicians are guiding customers from outside of their home in order to connect the services, and it's been a great success. And it will likely result in doing business that way in the future as well. So that's an innovation that will carry on post pandemic and in the recovery periods as well. And then, of course, we've enhanced our abilities for our customers to self-serve online as well. So overall, I mean, TELUS has invested $150 million to support Canadians overall, and business customers. We have about 500,000 business customers, and what we've been able to do as well is share our resources for the pandemic response with them as well, and the resources of our medical advisory council, which is a number of specialists with considerable experience and expertise in pandemic leadership, public health, mental health, primary care, occupational health, infectious disease, digital health, health economics. So we've been sharing those resources with our business customers as well. So a robust response and for what has become an essential service for Canadians, with a focus in on enabling Canadians to remain connected.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing those great insights. One quick question. So the measures that you have mentioned about like how what your organization is doing, particularly in terms of flexible workplace and the innovative solutions, is there a plan, like are these initiatives more to respond to the crisis at the moment, or you are seeing some positive results that may result in having these initiatives more long-term solutions, more as long-term solutions?
Yeah, so I would say that a number of the actions that we've taken in response to the COVID-19 crisis will remain in place over the long term, such as having more of our team members work remotely as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, some of this touchless and virtual installation support. And as we are going through the crisis and as we are working with our customers and communities, is that we're learning, along the way, and we can take those learnings forward with us, so that in the future that we can do things more efficiently, more safely, and to enhance our focus on our customers. And so I think the answer is yes. We are responding with innovation, and some of those innovations will remain in place in the recovery period, and once we're past the pandemic.
That's amazing. Yeah, we all hope for this situation to pass as soon as it can.
Yes,
but
for sure.
But yeah, we just have to navigate through it while it is here. Okay, let me now move to Brandon to kind of hear his thoughts on the crisis. So Brandon, being a representative of one of the largest financial institutions of Canada and one of the active supporters of the UN Global Compact Sustainability Principles, would really love to hear your thoughts about how your business is using the power of the principles to navigate through this crisis. And just for our attendees, unfortunately, we are having a technical situation with Brandon's webcam. So unfortunately, we cannot see him today, but I'm hoping that we can hear him loud and clear. So Brandon, over to you.
Thank you, Ayman. It's a privilege to be here with you today. We appreciate the opportunity to participate alongside Jeff and Magali. So thank you so much. Of course, in the times that we're living in, there's some really interesting themes I think that are emerging, which I hope that we'll be able to touch on a variety of these themes this afternoon and explore them. I think one of them is that sustainability we often talk about in terms of resilience, and I think COVID has really acted as a magnifying glass across different aspects of society where we can see structural and systemic kind of vulnerabilities, whether it's in supply chains and things like precarious work, concepts of inclusion and belonging and so forth. Then, of course, there's a lot of talk about stimulus and kind of how we rebuild in better ways. And I think we as sustainability professionals can also really think about how we can shape that new normal that will come out of this into, right? I don't think we're going to go back to the way that things used to be. There's also, I think, a risk when you think about environmental and social issues, with there being such a focus on health and safety at the moment, which of course there must be. There is a risk that some of these other considerations are pushed to the side a little bit, and I think that's something that we need to bear in mind. And then just kind of the structural inequalities that have come out of this as well, or that have been revealed through this, that you can really see who's being impacted more profoundly by COVID, and then what that might mean for our planning and around future issues that are going to come up as well. So I hope we'll be able to explore all those kinds of subjects through the conversation today. Much like how Jeff described TELUS, of course, the banking sector has been deemed an essential service through the COVID reaction and response and distancing. So we've obviously had to think very much about how we maintain our service level to our customers and really think about the health and well-being of our employees as we've navigated these last couple of months. So starting from the inside, looking at our employees, I mean, obviously, a lot of care has been taken for frontline workers who are actually in branches, and in investments in health and safety measures there, distancing and plexiglass and all these sorts of things, and our employees that are working in call centers. Of course, we're encouraging many of our customers to think about banking remotely, digitally, and over the phone wherever possible, and have launched specific services for healthcare workers, frontline workers, to access those services more quickly, so they don't have to wait in long call queues, for example, with a call center. But then taking care of those employees who are really servicing those customers in a frontline way, offering them additional stipends to top up their pay, ensuring that the distancing and work from home measures are available, of course. There's also been a really great recognition, I think, from the bank of people's unique needs in pivoting to a work from home situation. So the bank introduced additional personal days that are available for people to use as they see fit through the COVID experience. They've introduced additional budget for wellness related expenses in case folks need to set up new type of office spaces or equipment, or maybe it's support for health and well-being that is required at these times. And then there's been a lot of discussion internally about our own roles as leaders and managers through all of this, and we've invited in some experts from MedCan and other institutions who are experts around mental health and stress management to ensure that our employee base is able to manage through the challenges that they may face, or the unique circumstances that they may be facing as we pivoted to a new way of working. Then on the customer side, of course, you've probably seen in the media, there's a whole host of relief measures that have been offered, from the Bank of Canada right through the big banks through Canada, and things like payment deferrals and administration of a variety of those government programs that have been introduced. I mentioned the focus on digital banking and in particular some populations who are more vulnerable to COVID, like the elderly. So even just yesterday, to commemorate Seniors Month, we launched a program called Bank Your Way, specifically for seniors, to help overcome some of the barriers or apprehensions that that demographic might have about banking online in order to access the services and products in a safe way as possible. And then I'd also just want to touch on community investment. I think this is something where we pivoted very quickly at Scotiabank to allocate resources to community groups across Canada and beyond throughout our international footprint. Of course, I should mention Scotiabank is unique among our peers in our geographical footprint through Latin America in particular, and so we made an allocation of $2.5 million to really support frontline response to COVID in a variety of ways. So you've probably seen some of these things in the press as well, but we've offered support to Second Harvest in partnership with MLSE, where they've converted the playing surface of the Scotiabank Arena into a large kitchen that prepares meals that are then delivered to frontline workers. We're longstanding partners with United Way and have been supporting their distress center and support for seniors emergency response. Some interesting partnerships with academic institutions as well. University of Ottawa, University of Waterloo. In Ottawa, the engineering department has been printing 3D printing face shields for medical workers using some of the resources that we've provided to them. At Waterloo, they've been using artificial intelligence to look at x-rays and be able to detect indicators of COVID through that method rather than through a nose swab. So they can look at a positive COVID test and then look at a chest x-ray and try to determine using AI how they can identify COVID patients that way. And then other partnerships around ventilators and sterilization of N95 masks that they can be reused, et cetera. So I think these are all really really important responses that we've seen, and to echo Jeff's kind of reflections when deemed an essential service, how important and how focusing that becomes in terms of taking care of the employees and customers at a time of need.
Thank you so much, Brandon, for sharing those great leadership examples from Scotiabank that we always expect, and great to see that Scotiabank is responding really good to this whole COVID-19 crisis and coming out really strong to help the communities and its customers. So next we have Magali Depres from Transcontinental Incorporation. She is the Chief Strategy Officer, and first of all, I'd like to congratulate Magali to being accepted to UN Global Compact. Your organization is one of the very latest organizations that has been accepted to UN Global Compact family, and I'm hoping that starting with this webinar, we will be doing a lot of other great works and have your engagement with our network going forward. So Maggie, the question I have for you, so just as I have asked to Jeff and Brandon, like if you can quickly reflect on your thoughts on how this COVID-19 is impacting the packaging sector and what are some of the major shifts you're experiencing?
Thank you very much for having me, Eman. It's really an honor to share this session with you, with Jeff and Brendan today. So yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share how the COVID-19 crisis is going to impact the packaging sector. I'll start by saying that we experience a dramatic shift in consumer behaviors. People have been working remotely and they have prepared and taken their meals at home during this pandemic. And I believe that everyone has now gotten used to it. So we've seen an increase in the purchase of retail packaged goods in the past months, and this is certainly an upside for the packaging sector, for consumer brands, for retailers. And consumers have also used more e-commerce platforms to order their food. And if this shift remains, e-commerce will have significant implications for our packaging sector as well, given that most packaging has to be optimized for the e-commerce channels. So actually, e-commerce packaging are required to be 3 to 4 times more robust than traditional on-the-shelf packaging, to give you a feel for what it means for us. Another trend that we are seeing is that consumers are focused on essential goods. They have focused their purchase on the essentials. And certainly we're seeing an increased cost consciousness given the rise of unemployment and the economic uncertainties. And this price consciousness, these cost pressures will certainly have implications on the packaging sector as well. We'll need to be even more agile in our manufacturing processes, in our logistics, and we'll need to work closely in collaboration with everyone across the supply chain to remain efficient, to remain competitive. Another major trend that we're seeing, obviously, is the increased hygiene and consumer safety concerns. People do not want to put their health at risk. They have realized as well that packaging can offer the required protection for food or for other products, and ensuring that it is not touched or damaged and it is well preserved. And you may have noticed even that there was a return to single-use items and single-wrapped foods in these past months because of these immediate concerns. So in order to answer those requirements, I think packaging design, the choice of substrates, the functionalities of packaging could significantly be influenced. And of course, as Brendan was mentioning, all these additional hygiene requirements also mean for us in manufacturing increased health and safety measures in our operations. And during the pandemic, we have taken further very strict measures to ensure the health and safety of our employees while they were operating. And I believe this will also have an impact on the way we will continue working and organize our operations going forward. Now, to be more specific on sustainability in packaging, I think we all saw that with the onset of the COVID-19 crisis, sustainability has taken a bit of the back seat, so to say, to concerns about hygiene and food safety, as I was mentioning. And those have become higher priorities. However, I believe that sustainability will remain a key industry shaping trend. And in fact, sustainability goals have not been abandoned. You see fast-moving consumer goods companies, retailers, packaging manufacturers like us, all committed to long-term decarbonization. And we've made commitments related to packaging sustainability. In fact, most of them with 2025 targets. In fact, TC Transcontinental was the first Canadian-based manufacturer to join the Ellen MacArthur's Foundation Global New Plastics Economy commitment last year. And we have articulated very material objectives related to our economy, circular economy approach to plastic packaging. So in conclusion, I would say that, when the world emerges from this COVID-19 pandemic, the packaging sector will need to raise the bar to raise the performance in multiple ways to address what we now all call the new normal. We will continue in our efforts towards more sustainable packaging for sure. And we will obviously address hygiene requirements as well, and cost and consumer convenience.
Thank you so much, Magali, for sharing your thoughts and for kind of reestablishing the fact that, okay, the businesses should definitely consider the sustainability issues as a core of their business operations. And we should not be actually moving away from having sustainability as a foundation in designing a recovery phase. Going back to Jeff, Jeff, there must be a number of key issues that the corporate leaders are thinking about right now, as well as steps they can take to not only react to severe business shocks, but also to reshape their business and plans for recovery. Can you share some of those priority considerations with us?
For sure, happy to. I think in our industry and specifically at TELUS, we always keep the global goals in mind as we formulate our responses and strategies, and how these responses to this crisis can become core to our strategy moving forward. So in our case, we've thought about I guess a couple of topics that are very relevant nowadays, which of course is the health and well-being for Canadians, and then of course supporting our most vulnerable citizens overall. So to that end, we've collaborated with regional health authorities and provincial governments to, first of all, just provide and expand broadband connectivity to hospitals and pop-up clinics across the country. So I think that that's something that ties into what I was talking about earlier, just on the network piece, and that's critical to help Canadians in these times for sure. And TELUS, of course, is known. Well, you're talking about the fixed line telecommunications sector. Obviously, we have our wireless sector that we serve as well, and we provide security offerings for homes and businesses, as well as TV offerings. So there's that. But TELUS is actually Canada's leading digital healthcare company, and of course, one of the things that we were doing in that regard, in support of SDG 3 and for good health and well-being, is supporting the health and safety of frontline healthcare workers and Canadians by offering virtual consultations between patients and doctors through some of our electronic medical record virtual visit solutions. And in fact, since April, we've had about 30,000 of these consultations scheduled across the country. One of the things that we also have enabled is through one of our solutions called Babylon, that is now available to patients in British Columbia, Alberta, and Ontario, is access to a one-on-one video consultation where a locally licensed doctor, at no cost, from your smartphone and from the safety of your home, you can connect together. It's very important too, because as an ongoing issue, pre, during, and post-pandemic, there's nearly 5 million Canadians who don't have access to a family doctor. So we're leveraging this solution through TELUS Health called Babylon to make those connections. And similarly, we have a sister offering called Akira by TELUS Health, and that enables about 1,000 of Canada's largest employers offer their employees similar solutions with an employer-funded virtual care platform overall. So during this crisis, we've seen an addition of 300 employers pick up this service overall, and that's obviously very, very critical. And these tie over, as I mentioned earlier, into monitoring solutions for those who are ill, and particularly in our senior citizens. So we have a home health monitoring service that patients in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia are using. They're able to stay in the comfort of their own homes. They can get monitored by a virtual pool of public healthcare clinicians. So I think that's been one of the strategies that we've employed, but it also is looking to the future on how we can expand those to other areas of the country and provide these opportunities for Canadians as well. And I guess the last thing I'll maybe mention too is, just because Brendan had talked about sort of community giving and such, is that we've continued to leverage our TELUS Future Friendly Foundation and our community boards to help build public healthcare capacity through donation. And I think that's critical moving forward, as Brendan had said. When we are partnering directly with an example at TELUS is the Fondation du Centre Hospitalier de la Université de Montréal to amplify their work in supporting Canadians by purchasing 3D printing supplies and equipment that can be used to address specific health issues that are brought on by COVID-19. So maybe I'll pause there, but it's just really that focus in on our vulnerable citizens and supporting good health and well-being and the related SDGs there.
Thanks, Jeff, for sharing those insights. Definitely what we can understand, we can probably see a major shift in how medical services are being offered in future. And it's good to see how TELUS is going to play a very active role in shaping that digital transformation in the medical industry. I'm hoping that there might be some other solutions that you are also thinking of for the business industries as well, because one thing that we are hearing from the private sector is that to avoid this kind of shock in future, they are leaning more towards digital transformation in the organizations. And I'm hoping that we will be seeing some more robust solution from an organization like TELUS to help businesses with those kind of engagement.
For sure.
Okay, and so Brandon, would you be able to share your thoughts on the same, to avoid this kind of business shocks in the future and to kind of have business plans for recovery? What are some of the priority considerations for Scotiabank right now?
Thanks, Simon. I touched on in my introductory remarks the concept of resilience, and so if I start with just kind of the broader context, I think when you look at the countries who are struggling most with COVID right now, and I look to our neighbors to the south in particular, it seems that there were warnings in place or expert opinion that this sort of thing could potentially happen.
Brandon, we cannot hear you.
Iman, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Sorry. Okay, I think we both clicked to unmute at the same time. Sorry. Yeah, I think that I'll go back to this notion of resilience that I talked about at the beginning, and I think countries that have struggled with COVID, to take that wider context, look to our neighbors to the south in particular. There's indications that some of the expert opinion and warnings about the potential for a pandemic, those sorts of warnings were not heeded. And so, in some cases, where we can rely on expert opinion and anticipate future shocks and future disruption, I think sustainability professionals can really be that kind of future focused consciousness for an organization. And I think when we think ahead to sort of the climate crisis and biodiversity and growing inequality and other issues, they may be more slow moving in some ways, or they may be more acute in other ways. But I think that's part of our job, is to keep focus on those things and how we can future proof and prepare our organizations to best navigate those challenges that we can see on the horizon. So, for banks, I talked about being an essential service. We of course are thinking about how we will be offering our products and services in new and innovative ways more remotely. Scotiabank's been investing huge amounts of resources resources into technological development in recent years to the tune of about $15 billion over the last 5 years or so, which really enabled us to make this pivot to a work from home setup, remote working, fairly seamlessly, I would say. It's not without its bumps, of course, but fairly well. And many of our customers have benefited from the investments in our apps and products and services as such. When we think about the lending and investment side, I mean, in some ways, banks move with the economy, and so we can lead in some respects, and in other ways, we sort of, move with the flow of the economy and try to anticipate what that new normal is going to look like. So, I'm thinking about, stimulus in different jurisdictions and what that's going to mean. Effectively, what we're doing is front loading a whole bunch of stimulus that might have been spaced out over 5 to 10 years, and we're just doing it all now. And so if we get that right and we're investing in things that are going to prepare us to have the economy that we want in the future, then it's about, how do we prepare the bank to respond to and capitalize on those opportunities that will emerge. I think if we look at some of the systemic vulnerabilities that have shown up, and thinking of the UN Global Compact principles in particular, when we think about human rights and labor and supply chains and things like this, banks have a huge important role to play on safeguarding human rights through early detection of potential human trafficking and modern slavery. And so, in this type of a situation, those vulnerabilities can potentially even be greater. And so our work in this area around detecting those sorts of suspicious transactions and reporting them to the authorities, that hasn't slowed down in any way. We're also looking very much at our procurement and how we can integrate these sorts of considerations around social equity and security through different phases of our purchasing process, and to ensure that that those vulnerable folks in our supply chain are not kind of being left behind if they're in precarious work situations, etc. We've also been looking at kind of a social impact strategy for the bank, and kind of revisiting how we do community investment, philanthropy, but also using our core business to create social impact. And so that this has brought concepts of inclusion and belonging and access and equity much more into the fore as we've had those discussions. And then perhaps the last thing I would maybe talk about is on the environmental side. I mean, we've certainly seen an immediate response from groups like our real estate team. They've been incredibly focused on the COVID response in the short term, needing to get plexiglass up in branches and, source PPE for our employees, and thinking about what our office spaces are going to look like when we gradually re-enter the workplace over time. So in that respect, some of the emissions reduction and climate activities have been sort of put to the side just temporarily while we've had to respond in this way, and that's to be expected. But I think, to echo what Magali was saying, our level of ambition hasn't changed, and with the release of our climate commitments back in November, we made some significant pledges of how we want to evolve our business over time and really usher in the low carbon economy, and that all remains. And then finally, I think, we see, I talked about this kind of risk of pushing environmental and social considerations to the side a little bit because of such a focus on health and well-being, and rightly so. But we're thinking about also, things like events and gatherings, and how, from an environmental perspective in particular, these events will look in future with the health and safety needs and expectations and standards that will be in place as we emerge from this distancing and work from home situation. How can we ensure that care for the environment and the social considerations are taken into account there? So those are some of the things that we're thinking about. And then I think broadly, I just saw the results of a recent GlobeScan study that was done on the impact of COVID to sustainability, programs and budgets and so forth, you know, a lot of sustainability professionals are expecting their budgets to be curtailed in some way over the next, say, 12 months in the short term, but that the relevance and importance of our work actually is increasing and becoming more focused. And so the expectations might shift a little bit around social equity and health issues, but I think as sustainability professionals, we will be asked and expected to do more with less in the short term. But the good news is if we do it well, it should be profitable. So I think we should feel emboldened to bring forward those concepts that are going to promote equity and promote better environmental outcomes and reduce costs, open new markets, help our companies to mitigate risks, and to maintain that future focus that I talked about a little bit before. Because if we keep that focus a little bit on the longer term, it can really help us to mitigate the impacts of future shocks.
Thank you so much, Brandon. It was really reassuring to see how the recovery phase is being planned, keeping the 10 sustainability principles from UN Global Compact in mind. And kudos to your team for taking all those great initiatives, particularly to strengthen your commitment to the sustainability principles. It's really reassuring to see. Magali, going back to you, I just recently saw that TC Transcontinental has set 11 corporate social responsibility targets for 2019 to 21 across 4 areas: people, operation, products, and communities. What roles do you think these CSR targets are going to play in making strategy or plans for the recovery phase?
Thank you, Anand. And I was really inspired listening to Geoff and Brendan. You could not see me nodding, but I was. Yes, indeed. In 2019, we released our new corporate social responsibility plan called Acting Together. And at TC Transcontinental, sustainability is fully embedded into our strategy. And in fact, as a Chief Strategy Officer, I also overlook corporate social responsibility for the corporation. So it is really absolutely embedded for us. I shall mention also that during this pandemic, the last few months, we were writing down our 2019 progress report, which we will release later this month. And as you mentioned, we joined the Global Compact signatories, and our CSR activities and projects have not stopped. So we remain fully committed. So regarding the role of sustainability in our strategy and plans for the recovery phase, I believe that sustainability will remain our guiding compass. And as we shape this new normal, we will think, of sustainability in the spirit of rebuilding better. So I'll give you a few examples. First, on our first pillar on people. I mentioned it earlier, we put health and safety of our employees first, and in this we are fully aligned with the goal number 8 of the SDGs actually. And since the outbreak of COVID-19, we've taken diligent steps to ensure physical distancing in our facilities. We implemented strict health and safety measures to ensure that our employees can operate safely and return home safe every day. So as we shape this new normal, I think we're going to reflect on the key learnings we've made during this pandemic. And we're already looking at how we will organize our operations. So we keep protecting our employees, obviously, and we can be even more agile in our processes and ensure continuity of services for our customers. So this is definitely key for us. The second area I'd like to mention as an example is on our second pillar in our CSR strategy, which is our operations. And we have very material targets on waste reduction, on greenhouse gas emissions reduction, cutting overall our carbon footprint. And again, this is aligned with the goal, I believe, 7 and 12 of the Global Compact SDGs. So we're happy of the progress we've made to date, but obviously we're still working to improve our KPIs, and we'll not stop this. In fact, we have identified a number of projects that will help us reduce our carbon footprint. And in fact, and Brendan alluded to that as well, by doing so, we know that it's not only good for the planet, but it will also help us achieve savings and be more cost efficient. So to me, it's a win-win and a perfect example of where environmental performance and financial performance go hand in hand. The third pillar of our corporate social responsibility strategy is on products. I mentioned it earlier. We are more than ever committed to the new plastics economy commitment we've made. We believe that plastics shall never become waste. And in fact, we have committed to invest 1% of our packaging sector revenues to our research and development activities. And our team are already working on new structures, new products, which are either 100% recyclable or compostable or contain a given percentage of post-consumer recycled plastics. So in doing this, we work very closely with our supply chain, with our customers, and we are involved in various projects already, where the goal is to recycle and to reuse plastics coming from the municipal sorting and recycling facilities and from other industrial sources as well. So TC Transcontinental has recently announced the launch of a new recycling division in our packaging sector. So as you can see, we live and breathe the circular economy of plastics every step of the way. Finally, regarding communities, which is the fourth pillar of our corporate social responsibility strategy, we have a long-standing commitment to philanthropy. And each year, we and our employees, we support many causes that focus on education, that focus on health, on the environment. Last year, TC Transcontinental gave more than $2 million, either in monetary donations or in the form of products and services to 200 organizations, projects and programs that support the communities where we operate. And I'll finish by saying that the current pandemic has demonstrated how much the support to our communities was an integral part of our corporate vision. I would say that the COVID pandemic, has reminded us of the importance of acting together responsibly, and doing our part as a corporate citizen. So we're definitely committed to continuing our efforts, to working with all our stakeholders, and to improve the economic, the social, and the environmental conditions of our societies.
Thank you so much, Magali, for sharing those concrete examples to highlight how sustainability can be used as a force for good and to do better business. That's really reassuring. So now moving back to one of our most dear topics and one of the key issues that we have for this decade, the Sustainable Development Goals, or more popularly known as the Sustainable Development, the SDGs. So these SDGs are, as we see, are fundamental to long-term success of every business, providing an opportunity to assess the value system through the lens of sustainability. Sadly, this pandemic hit at a time when the SDGs were gaining attraction and a significant number of countries were making some good progress. As we are coming almost to the close of the session, I would love to see, if you can reflect for 2 to 3 minutes, what are your thoughts about how do you think this is going to play out post-crisis? What role businesses can play to ensure that their responses to the pandemic are not delinked from the Sustainable Development Goals? So Jeff, I'll start with you.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I guess one thing that pops out right away is how these global issues defined by the SDGs are at the forefront of what is being focused on in the world right now. In fact, tell us when we were pondering the recovery phase, we were thinking about, with that lens, this SDGs really as a framework to recovery, right? We need to end this pandemic, focusing on people, as I mentioned, women, youth, low-wage workers, vulnerable groups who are already at risk. And we need to work together as organizations and governments and citizens to, of course, save lives, restore livelihoods, and work to bring back the global economy and get it back on track. So to me, that means that I would 100% agree that we can't really afford to shift our resources away from priority actions on the SDGs, and therefore the response to this pandemic and then the recovery phase can't be delinked, as you comment on, from actions on the SDGs. I think if we achieve the SDGs, it puts us on a very solid foundation to dealing with these global health risks and COVID-19 or other emerging infectious diseases. I've talked about goal 3, good health and well-being, and focusing in on the SDGs will help us strengthening the capacity for all of us to respond to early warning, risk reduction, and management of these health risks. Obviously, it's exposed crisis in global health systems, this pandemic. But having said that, there's various organizations like UNESCO and ILO, and I was reflecting on an article that was written by the presidents of the Republic of Ghana and Norway, who co-chair the UN. I want to get that right. The UN Secretary General's group of advocates for the SDGs, and we're going to have issues with 1 billion students across the globe who've been impacted by this pandemic, millions of people losing their jobs, and there's so many other, in many parts of the world, we're seeing impacts on clean water and sanitation, obviously weak economic growth and decent work, which is goal 8, pervasive inequalities, goal 10, and of course, goes without saying, crisis and poverty and food security, which are goals 1 and 2. So I think it just reiterates the fact that the SDGs are a good framework. It can help us as we try and build back these recoveries better, and sort of double down on what you importantly shared, Iman. We don't want to lose momentum on this decade of action on the SDGs.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's really refreshing to see that, okay, the commitments are still intact on the Sustainable Development Goals. That's what we love to hear. And we'd love to know from Brandon as well. So Brandon, do you see any improved commitment or any? So Scotiabank definitely has some priority Sustainable Development Goals to report back on, and they have identified some priority areas to work. But do you think with this pandemic crisis going on, there could be a possibility to identify new SDGs, which could be a priority areas for Scotiabank to explore into? Brandon, we cannot hear you. Let me try and unmute Brandon from my side.
Can you hear me now, Iman?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Great. So yeah, I agree with much of what Jeff said. I mean, as you've indicated, we've identified a few priority SDGs where we think we can make the biggest difference. But I think this pandemic has really brought many of the SDGs into greater focus. I mean, if you can just go down the list and look at where we're seeing vulnerabilities in poverty or hunger or health and well-being or access to education and gender equality, go through the whole list and you can see how COVID has elucidated or exacerbated some of the challenges we face. So I think it'll cause us to refocus and relook at the SDGs and where we can have a big impact. But I think it has been a real magnifying glass that has revealed some of these vulnerabilities and injustices. And I talked about supply chains, precarious work, but even in our own backyards, when you think about things like job security and health and the choices that people are having to make between, going to work and risking their health versus, being in a situation where their employer is able to kind of protect them a little bit more, access to healthcare, access to education. My wife's a teacher, and I've been, really intrigued and appalled in some ways by how many families just in the Toronto area don't have access to internet or devices that can enable their children to access education through this period. So when you think about equity and access, these are, it's bringing these things into greater focus. So That's troubling in a way, but I think it brings a lot of focus. And then in other ways, I think I'm even more hopeful about our ability to achieve the goals. Like in some ways, COVID has unveiled new flows of compassion across society and different evolving modes of connectivity and access by necessity. So, we're seeing kind of nature flourishing a little bit more in cities. We're seeing, the traffic flows kind of die down a little bit, and shared streets and how we think about public spaces seems to be evolving. Emissions levels and air quality have been affected by this, and questions about work-life balance and integration and understanding people's unique circumstances of life and how we can best cater to that to enable people to live fulfilling lives. And then even the flip side of the access to education question is, well, if universities and so forth are going to be offering all of their programming online now, does that make it potentially easier for more people to pursue post-secondary education at a lower cost? So there could be some real great things that come out of this, and I hope we're able to make a lot of those things stick, in addition to having the clarity of some of the challenges that we can address. So I agree with Jeff that the SDGs become an even more important framework for us to think about how we rebuild. And I think our challenge is to really capture what we're seeing and then act accordingly, really addressing these inequalities and injustices, building back better, and securing and maintaining as much of the positivity that we've seen come out of this as possible.
Thank you so much, Brandon. I think my team is getting some really good notes from this conversation, and we'll definitely publish those as soon as we have the recording ready, and the summaries will be uploaded on our website. And I'm thinking like we can use some of these notes to kind of share our thoughts with the private sector, what can be done to kind of reestablish this commitment on the Sustainable Development Goals. Magali, let's hear from you about your thoughts on the Sustainable Development Goals and how what organizations can do to kind of keep their commitments intact on these SDGs. And I think after that, we won't have any more time to go over any of the other topics we probably planned for today, but I think we got some already good insights. So let's hear your final thoughts on that one.
Thank you, Eman. Well, in fact, I mentioned how we at TC Transcontinental are very committed to the SDGs, and I believe, in fact, that many companies have made strong and public commitments aligned with the Global Compact goals. TC Transcontinental is a public listed company. I can tell you that we notice great interest from our investors and our stakeholders on how we embed sustainability goals into our strategy. And you surely all remember the famous letter of Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, to the CEOs of the top 500 companies earlier this year, where he was reinforcing the message of embedding climate change impact into companies' strategies and reminding everyone to take action. So I think that we may be under the short-term impression at times that sustainability is secondary to economic viability, but I believe it will come back in a big wave. And in fact, this pandemic has made everyone reflect on what went wrong and why we ended up with this crisis. So I think people want to see a change in the way we work, in the way we consume, in the way we impact our planet, and younger generations certainly remind us of that. And our employees want to see also a social purpose in their work. They want more social justice, they want equal chances, equal pay, more diversity and inclusion. So as we rethink the way we work, the way we consume, the way we operate, I think we can create new opportunities for a greener economy with new infrastructures, new technologies, and again, it's very, very aligned with the SDG goals. And we experience certainly at TC Transcontinental already a number of projects where the entire supply chain, businesses, science, education, governments are working together to achieve larger goals. So in conclusion, Eman, I would say that this new decade is about collaboration, it's about joining forces, it's about inspiring each other and staying committed to the SDG goals. And it is about our license to operate and our responsibility for generations to come. So the next decade will definitely be a decade of action, I would say.
Thank you so much, Magali, for all those inspiring remarks. You couldn't see me, but I kept nodding my heads really, really rigorously while you were speaking. No, definitely I'm feeling much better after listening to all of your responses. It's great to see that at least for your organization, the focus on the Sustainable Development Goals is still very intact and in fact more promising. I hope the rest of the private sector are thinking the same way. So I think we are almost at the end of the session. Thank you so much for participating today with us and sharing those great insights with our attendees today. We will be uploading the webinar recording on our website 2 to 3 days from now as soon as the recording is ready, and we'll also prepare some notes that we have collected from this conversation today. And we are also hoping to do some more work with your organizations to see what other tangible documents we can prepare for the private sector to help them with some resources that can be used as a guiding document to work around the recovery phase. And I will definitely reach out to you to discuss more of those in details. But thank you so much again for your time today, and wish you all quick recovery from this phase, and hopefully we will be able to stand strong again together very soon. Have a good day.
Thank you, Ayman. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Magali.
Thanks.
Thank you
everyone.
very much, Jeff. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, Ayman.